Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Beard, and I am so delighted to be here today to share with you some information about how you can serve clients who are differently abled more effectively. I have been a real estate agent for 20 plus years in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And in the last 3 years or so, I've been doing more and more teaching and training and education around the country around this important subject. And I'm glad you're all here. I have a presentation for you, but I do want to share that if you have a question, feel free to let us know, put it in the chat, and we'll answer it as we go along. So here's what we're going to do while we're together today. I want to talk with you about what accessibility actually is. And I want to talk to you about language around accessibility. I want to share with you some thoughts about housing options and challenges for clients who are differently abled. And I want to share ways that you can help your buyers to find a suitable property and manage the whole process. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about government benefits and saving for homeownership. Um, and I also want to talk about Section 8 homeownership, which is a little known thing that many people aren't aware of. I want to spend a little bit of time talking with you about fair housing considerations and best practices. And then I have some resources to share with you. So we're going to dig right in because there's a lot of material here. So the first question is, how do we define accessibility? What do we mean by this term? What is accessibility? So the answer is that it's really hard to define it because every person's needs are unique. And one of the things that we want to do with our buyers and sellers is customize the solution to meet their needs. Just because you have two people who both use a wheelchair, maybe both of them use a power wheelchair, doesn't mean they're both going to use their housing spaces the same way. And it's important for you to think about it. Is so that you ask the right kinds of questions around how they use spaces. We'll get to that in a little bit. But the important thing is that different people will have different needs, and there is no one size fits all when we're talking about a buyer consultation and helping our clients to find that right home for themselves. I wanted to touch on some key language terms that you're going to come across. The first one is the idea of universal design. So there is a move in architecture world, in the architectural and development world, around universal design concepts. And basically living spaces that anybody can use regardless of their ability or disability. This only goes so far, but a lot of progress has been made to certainly improve from where we're at right now. And we're talking about mostly physical characteristics of housing. And we're not just talking about wide hallways or wider door widths. We're also talking about kitchen and bathrooms designed for different uses. So that's the concept of universal design. Another important concept in the world of supporting these clients is visitability. Visitability is the idea that if a person is the idea of a property, a home where at least one bedroom and one bathroom are on a pathway with no barriers or thresholds. So if I live in a neighborhood and I go to visit my next door neighbor, I can get into their house, I can get to a bathroom, and I won't have a problem if I'm perhaps a person who uses a wheelchair. Another idea is ADA compliant. You might see ADA compliant come up. So when you hear that, that's talking about someone who uses that term, or if we see it in print, it means it's a claim that spaces meet the definition of accessibility as specified in the Americans with Disabilities Act. I would strongly discourage the use of this in any MLS posting you do or any advertising you do about residential housing, because it's not relevant. What a lot of people don't realize is that the Americans with Disabilities Act does not deal with residential housing, except in a very limited sense when it has to do with government projects through FHA. Certain types of government funded projects or government funding comes into the play are not would fall under the ADA for when they get that government funding. But the vast majority of housing in the United States is residential and does not have government funding and is not fall under the ADA. Now, it does fall under certain other uh, legal parameters, such as fair housing law and building codes, but not the ADA. Another concept that we talk about is aging in place. And this is the idea of modifying a living environment so people don't have to move in the first place when they are no longer able to enjoy their home the way they had previously. Sorry about that. So I wanted to also, there's one that's not on here, and that is the idea of adaptability. There are lots of homes that could be promoted as if you were a listing agent, as being adaptable. And that is to say, with just a modest changes, could be made more accessible, if you will. Another aspect of the language is how we talk about people who are differently abled and how we talk with them. So I would encourage you to use people first language all the time. Many people I know who have a very physically obvious disability do not like to be identified as being by their mobility aid, if you will. So we would never say, for example, wheelchair bound. We would say a person who uses a wheelchair. Um, I've been using the term differently abled um, because it's the least bothersome of all the other options for how to identify this large group. I mean, almost 20% of our population nationwide self-identifies with some kind of disabling condition. Another term you will see is special needs or special abilities. I'm not a fan of that. Um, you will also hear handicapped or handicapped accessible. I would avoid the use of the word handicapped. It's quite fallen quite out of favor in the community. You will also hear terms like neurodiverse versus neurotypical, especially if you've had some exposure to the world of the autism spectrum. So those are other terms that you might hear. Bottom line, though, is we don't want to get caught up in labels. And your clients will tell you how they want to be identified. Um, I think the important point is to come with an authentic spirit to your conversations with people. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to talk with people who identify differently or who are differently abled, and how you do that in a way that is not going to make you feel embarrassed or make them feel embarrassed. Context is everything, and we're going to talk about that. So we have an affordable housing crisis in the United States. It's worse in some built up areas, but it is still a huge problem all over the country. And so we have this lack of affordable housing. But for many folks who are differently abled, there is a horrible lack of accessible property. Accessible meaning adequately accessible or adaptable. to be able to be even in the realm of being purchasable, assuming that they did have the money or the financial resources. In my area, 1 in 50 homes has an accessibility feature of one sort or the other. And because everyone's needs are unique, very often that one accessibility feature is inadequate or irrelevant for my client. So this is a huge, huge problem. The other problem is that if you serve clients in an older community, it may be very expensive to renovate a property for accessibility. The older the housing stock, generally speaking, the worse it is. And then finally, there is really limited expertise by landlords, real estate agents, developers, architects, urban planners, and the whole world of people who create housing and support housing out there around accessibility. Interior designers, too. And so these are a challenge for us to serve our clients effectively. Um, and part of it is you simply don't know what you don't know, right? So you have a client, they have a housing need, and there's some accessibility slash ability questions there. There are basically 4 options for your client. One is to age in place. Now, aging in place can be a really good answer. Um, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Supported living arrangements, for certain folks who cannot live independently, living in an environment, some sort of housing that provides built-in support. I'm not thinking so much of group homes here as I am as community living spaces, um, which are becoming a model through different networks of organizations to provide housing and a lot of support for people. Usually it's rental housing. Um, a person could move to a rental property and make it accessible. Um, and landlords are obligated to allow a person to make accessibility renovations as a reasonable accommodation. And then, of course, moving to a new property that they own and making it accessible. Those are the 4 basic choices. And I want to just go back and talk about aging in place just a little bit. Aging in place is the best option for affordability in terms of the costs, right? So if I were to go into someone who told me they had to sell their home because they could no longer get up and down the stairs. I had this happen last year. We would refer them to a contractor who can maybe have a solution that will allow them not to have to sell the property. This is really a big deal, and they will really appreciate you later on when the time comes that they do need to sell the property. Better that they age in place if there's an answer. Just to give you an example, the situation was an aging couple in their 60s, and the husband was suffering from ALS, and it was progressive and getting worse. And he was really struggling to get up and down the stairs in their 2-story house where all the bedrooms were upstairs. And so the first thought is we need to sell this house. But when we consulted with them, we advised them instead to consult with one of our contractor colleagues who is a specialist in chairlifts and modifying stairwells and staircases to be supportive. And so that's what they did. Instead of selling the property, they put in a chairlift that worked. They first thought that was not an option. They thought our stairwell is too narrow. We can't do this. But it could be done, and it was done, and it saved them a lot of short-term headache and challenge. I talked about supported living arrangements already, and the other 2. I just wanted to go back to that. So when you are meeting buyer clients specifically, and we're about to embark on a whole new world in the way we represent buyer clients. And so one of the big things that is important when you're representing a buyer yeah, it's such that they're going to pay you if the seller doesn't, is that you have a value proposition, that you have a reason why they should hire you versus anybody else and pay you if no one else will. And so this gets to some of the things that you can really support your clients about in this realm. And the first thing is be really curious. Be very, very curious. Do not make assumptions. Just because somebody comes to you and they're presenting as a person who uses a power wheelchair does not mean that they do not want a two-story house, for example. So ask lots of questions. Um, and in order so that you don't feel like you're being asking personal type questions, let's focus on the housing need, not on the person. So, for example, who in your family will have the most difficulty moving? It might not even be, they may not think it's them. They may think it's perhaps an aging parent. Your client may be parents of a child who has some mobility challenges. Might be your client may not be the person who would have the difficulty. So that's important. How can we, that is you, make the transition easier for the move that's going to happen? How do you or your family member use spaces in the home? And, I think it's perfectly okay for you to get specific here. Um, if the person is a manual wheelchair user who has upper body strength, uh, you can ask them very specific questions, like, for example, what side of the toilet do they get up off of? Now that sounds really personal, but depending on what side they say is going to help you evaluate bathrooms that you look at for them in regards to where modifications may be necessary for the location of the wheelchair if they're transferring or if they need grab bars. Um, and so how they use spaces is the critical part here. The person who is going to have the difficulty with the moving. Um, and what community resources will be needed. I think this is really important also, because many of the folks who come to you who want to buy property are using services in the community. They might be using direct support professionals to help them with their uh, uh, day activities of daily living, eating, dressing, bathrooming, everything. They might be going to places in the community where they work or where they have activities, school and stuff that they need to have certain transportation to and from it. Those are types of things that are important. People might be coming into the home who might either just be coming during the day or might be coming there to live. All very important considerations. So ask your client, how do they want to use the kitchen? How do they use the kitchen? They may tell you, I don't cook at all. My aide comes in and cooks for me. I don't ever go in the kitchen. Or how do they use the bathroom? We talked about that, the garage or the parking area. Um, do, uh, how will they or not use yard space? How will they get to and from the property? How will they access local walkable amenities, if at all? And how will they work with caregivers inside the home and out? Because it's a very different housing question if the caregiver is going to be sleeping overnight from time to time, living there, or only coming during the day. Those are all different types of scenarios that will impact the housing choices they'll make. So, searching for property. So, unfortunately, across the country and specifically in built up urban areas, we have mostly older homes and neighborhoods with narrow hallways, lots of steps, and poor access to switches and receptacles. And there are very limited rules that require housing to be accessible. Again, certain types of multi-unit housing might be subject to building codes or fair housing law and government money that will impose some accessibility requirements. But for the vast majority of housing, there's no rules around accessible residential housing. And there are no laws or rules that require property that is accessible to be sold or rented to people who can use the features of that home. Um, and so very often, a listing agent and a seller who don't see the value of that wheelchair ramp that in the front or the side of the house might be inclined to tear it out, thinking that they'll get a better price for the house without it. Um, but yet they're cutting out a whole pool of potential buyers when they do that. Um, Another thing is neighborhoods. Most of our neighborhoods are not accessible. So let's suppose you buy a house or your client buys a house and they modify it for accessibility and they put in a ramp. Maybe they need a ramp, they modify the bathroom, roll-in shower, something like that. But then, the sidewalks all beat up or the all their neighbors' homes are inaccessible. So that creates a kind of a um, inadequacy for the neighborhood as well. And one of the things that is a problem in our neighborhoods is that we don't design them in a universal way. They kind of come together in an ad hoc way. I know there's some work going on in Idaho to work with developers to build entire neighborhoods that are accessible, not just individual homes in a new development. On the other hand, the good news is that newer construction must be more disability friendly. Most condos and apartments have some accessibility. Condos and apartments built since 1990 typically have really good general accessibility. So you'll have no thresholds from the front of the building or from the parking area to the units, and you will have to the unit's front door, not the building front door if it's a building. And you'll have wide hallways and open kitchen, dining rooms, and uh, big bathrooms out of big hallway accesses. So the modifications that are needed for a person who uses a power chair, for example, might be just limited to the shower tub enclosure. And maybe some shelving modifications or cabinetry changes. So those represent an opportunity. And we talked a little bit before about adaptability. Some properties can be made adaptable, can be made accessible with just minor modifications. In my area, there's lots of one-level homes. Usually they're like a craftsman style, pretty little square, little box style, one level, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, 3 bedroom, 1 bath, sometimes 3 bedrooms, 2 bath. And there's some concrete steps to the front entrance. So that's a fairly minor thing, to convert to a level in scenario. Now, once you get more than 2 steps, the more rise you've got, the more expensive it gets to modify. But that's the adaptability of properties is really an important thing to think about. So the multiple listing services that we all use are and all the online search tools, they're really limited. And although a lot of efforts are being made by some realtor groups around the country to make our MLSs more helpful, um, they are remaining quite limited and difficult as a service to buyers agents specifically, and to sellers agents, listing agents as well, around accessibility features in homes. Um, One of the challenges that around the country, there's no consistent formats or verification of accuracy. Now, Washington State, our next door neighbor, does have a whole verification process. If a listing agent puts in that there's an accessibility feature, they're required by the MLS to verify it, to provide a verification of it. There's a special form they have to fill out. They're really way ahead of most of the rest of the country in Washington State on that issue of verification of accuracy. But agents are still not required to specify an accessibility feature, even in Washington State. So if they don't specify an accessibility feature, there's no verification process. And that takes us to the second bullet point. Many agents don't properly identify accessibility features when they promote their properties, either on the MLS or otherwise. And there's a lot of reasons why they don't do it. One of which may have to do with a perception that agent and that seller have that it is a negative feature and not something they want to focus on. Um, but a lot of times they don't click the right box in their MLS because they simply didn't think about it, weren't aware that it was there. Because it's not one of the main required things like the number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, square footage. Um, the MLS, some MLSs do a better job at this, but there's many properties that have virtually no steps to the entrance, zero threshold, and those are not clearly identified. And also, no steps to the entrance is available in some MLSs, but it can be misunderstood by some agents where they will point at where they will say there's no steps when there's actually a 3-inch lip at the end of the door before the concrete sidewalk to the pathway to the door. And that 3 inches is a no-go for a person in with certain types of mobility challenges, or at the very least a trip hazard for them. So then the question becomes, how what how do you know? And you need to go look. You need to call the listing agent. You need to check it out. But I would be wary when you hear no steps to the entrance. It's a good sign when it's promoted because at least someone has thought about it. But it may, I've seen many times where they say there's no steps, and there may not be a step in the typical idea of a staircase step, but it's not zero threshold. And that creates an opportunity for us to support our client by checking it out. And pictures. I think pictures can really tell a misleading, give you not, first of all, many pictures don't really show you the parts of the property that are relevant for accessibility. But even if they do, it's sometimes very misleading. And so be wary of relying on the MLS information to be definitive around whether a property will work for your client or not. I mean, sometimes it will. I mean, sometimes it'll be obvious, but just keep these things in mind. So, from my clients, I have a certain things that I'm always on the lookout for, whether for different clients that I work with. So, for our clients who have mobility challenges, I am looking at any and all thresholds that I see, from the street to the door, from a car to the door where the driveway is or the garage, and from the bus stop if they don't drive, or the local from elsewhere where they might be coming from. Access to all places in the property and on the lot. Access turning radius from kitchen to bathroom, hallway widths, the ability to turn into and out of rooms. Now, this is a big deal. I mean, one of the funniest things that ever happened in my career is I went in to preview a house and it had this amazingly accessible bathroom, but the door was too narrow and the hallway was very narrow. So the person with the wheelchair user wouldn't be able to get into that bathroom that was nice and big on the inside. Vehicle access is very important. Access from a parked accessible van. Now, accessible vans are vehicles where the wheelchair itself, the user of the wheelchair goes into the van and stays in their wheelchair in the van. Or maybe they drive their scooter into the van and then they leave the van and go drive the car. I've seen that too. Either way, how do you take the wheelchair or the scooter with or without a person in it out of the vehicle? Is it rear or side access? And if it's side access, is there enough room in the garage for the ramp to come down for the person in the wheelchair or for the scooter to be taken out? Um, and if there's just a driveway, how does that work? So you want to think about those things if you have a client who will be getting in and out of a parked accessible van to get to their home. This is also relevant for people who use a paratransit service of any sort. They will be dropped off, and wherever they get dropped off is going to be relevant to this too. And also the location of level changes like curb cuts for that is important. Access to and from sliding glass doorways, access to and size of elevators. Now, I don't know if you have many elevator buildings in your area where you're serving clients, but elevators in older buildings sometimes are awful for people with accessibility challenges if they are by themselves, because some of these older building elevators have doors before the elevator slides open. So you have the idea of a typical elevator in an office building, it just slides open and close, you push the button. But what if you have to open a wooden door or a metal door before you could get into or out of the elevator? That's a problem with older 1960s style apartment style condominiums. We also work with clients who have cognitive challenges. So one of the things we're thinking about there is the level of independent living skills that they require for the location where they are going to be going to. Location of work, school, and supports. Suitability of the house that they're considering or the property they're considering for their care providers or assistants. We touched on that before. And the suitability for property management by your client in their home. So if you're working with a person who is high functioning autistic, for example, working with them and their family usually or their loved ones to uh, help them to understand the property management responsibilities where they're going to be living and how to mitigate their weaknesses in that area or their strengths, manage their strengths in that area is important. We do want to support independent living as much as we possibly can. And that touches on that point. We don't want to discourage people from living independently if it's possible. We want to support them to do it.
Hey Stephen, sorry to interrupt. We had a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sometimes remarks are pulled because of fair housing violation. What's the best way to explain a home is good for folks with mobility challenges without it getting pulled?
Oh, that is a great thing. The great question. And I'm going to touch on it later, but to answer the question, talk about the property, not about any individual or any individual need. So instead of saying good for a wheelchair user, talk about wide hallways uh, and accessible roll-in showers. Focus on the accessibility feature, not on the user who will take advantage of that accessibility feature. Um, I don't know if that answers the question, but if it doesn't, send me an example of what you got called on, and I'd be happy to talk about how we would rework it. Great question. All right, so I talked about aging in place already. If the property is suitable and the costs are reasonable, it's usually the best scenario is renovation. And I want to point out that there are many cities around the country that provide grants or loans to help people renovate their homes to be accessible. And a buyer can sometimes utilize FHA financing in something called a 203K loan to get the cost of renovations built into their purchase. Um, Check your own local cities and state around and what is offered at different in your community where you are around what is available. The thing I would say about accessibility renovations is that they are often limited to low income individuals, people who are below a certain percentage of area median income are able to qualify, and you can't if you're making too much money. But it depends. It varies dramatically all over the country, and there are certainly plenty of cities that don't offer anything like this. There are lots of specialist contractors, architects, and designers around the country who can help with uh, accessibility renovations, and they know what they're doing. They understand these things. Now, of course, the more rural you are, the availability may be less, but you never know. And it's absolutely something that should be looked into. All right. I want to shift gears, if I can, and talk a little bit about buying a home when you're on government benefits. How can our clients afford to buy a home on government benefits? So there are two main types of government benefits affiliated with differently abled folks. Number one is Social Security disability income, which is called SSDI. And this is typically for someone who's been in the workforce and became disabled, and as a result, is getting this SSDI benefit each month from the federal government. And the other main one we see is called SSI, Supplemental Security Income. And this is typically for people who have been unable to work since they were minors, so before they were adults, and who are getting these government benefits called SSI. And I know many of you have heard of these things before, but one of the things I really want to make sure everyone is clear about is no government benefit can be taken away because someone buys their own home. Full stop. Now, there are some benefits like SSI and Medicaid that may limit how much money people can have in their bank account each month. And Medicaid may be repayable. This is on a state by state level. Whether Medicaid is repayable if the person and how that works. The problem with this is that typically people on SSI and Medicaid can only have $2,000 in the bank if they're an individual, or $3,000 in the bank if they're a married couple each month, all of their savings account. And so that's a problem. In our high cost housing world, obviously, that's a fraction of a deposit, let alone a full down payment. So there are three basic strategies. One is for the person to save money in an ABLE account, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Number two, use gifted funds. And number three, use down payment assistance programs. So with gifted funds, as many of you already know, a third-party family member, the lenders will allow a third-party family member to deposit money into escrow for the purpose of helping their family member to buy a home. And such gifted funds go directly to the escrow account. They don't go to the buyer directly. Therefore, they don't impact any of this stuff, any of these asset limits. Down payment assistance program I'm going to talk about in a minute. But first, I want to talk about ABLE Act, the ABLE Act at ABLE accounts. So ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. Passed in 2014, it was a rare bipartisan federal law. And it allows people who are disabled to save money without losing any government benefits. The current law says they must be diagnosed with the disability condition before the age of 26, but in 2026, the law's already been passed. It's rising to age of 46. So it's going to become much, much better for those folks who suffer spinal cord injuries, or other types of car accidents and such that became disabled after the age of 26. And at the current time, you can save up to $18,000 a year in these accounts. Money can come in from almost any source. And you can use the money for quote unquote qualified expenses, which is very broadly defined, including buying a home. And you don't need to collect any government benefits to get one of these accounts. You just merely need to show that you're disabled in most cases. And so many of the states have their own ABLE accounts. Oregon is one of them. And this works like a college savings account, non-taxable. Any taxes that it earns are deferred. So this is a really good option. If you have a buyer who wants to save for a down payment, this is a way they can do it if they fit the criteria. And now I want to talk a little bit about down payment assistance. There is not currently, in my area anyway, well, let me get to that in a minute. There's two basic types of down payment assistance that you're going to encounter when you're working with all low income buyers and where there's affordability concerns, right? So the first is what we call a silent second mortgage, right? No payments are due until the home is sold or refinanced in most cases. And you get these from state government agencies, large cities, some nonprofits offer these as well. And the second main type is shared equity or appreciation loans, where the money is provided, but instead of a silent mortgage that pays off when the person sells, they get their return based on the profit when the home is sold. And This is another way that we have down payment assistance. I do want to point out there's a third type. Sorry, let me tell you the third type: grants and forgivable loans. In my state, I'm from California. The California Association of Realtors, up until very recently, had a $10,000 closing cost grant. So there's all kinds of programs out there, and the couple of things. First of all, these programs vary by region. So what may be available in Portland or in Eugene might be different. And the programs come and go, and so that's the kind of thing you want to keep up with. There are some lenders who are very knowledgeable about these things, and there are other lenders that are less so. Um, there are very few of any of these three that focus on people who are differently abled. Um, but they do come up from time to time. That California one that I was just talking to you about uh, was designed for what they called underserved communities, one of which was people with disabilities. So they come and go, and they could be great help to your clients. And so you should keep an eye out for those things and research them and find a lender partner who's going to support you in, support you in your um, search for this. They know a little bit about it. Not all lenders do. I want to talk a
Um,
little bit about Section 8 homeownership. Um, Many of you may be aware about Section 8. It's a program where landlords get paid about two-thirds of the rent, around two-thirds of the rent from the local housing authority, a HUD organization, or and the tenant only pays one-third. And that third, that like it varies what the actual numbers are, and it varies on how many bedrooms they qualify for with their voucher. Um, Section 8 home ownership says that, well, instead of that portion that instead of that money that the housing authority is contributing to uh, contributing for rent, going to rent, what if it went to a bank as part of a mortgage payment so that the voucher was now a mortgage payment, all of it, instead of being a rent payment? So this creates an opportunity for home ownership for people who might never have been able to qualify for a mortgage before. So you have a mortgage subsidy, and you can layer it with down payment assistance. And I've helped clients do this in my area over the years. And then, 10 years later, and I live in a market that's, highly appreciating San Francisco Bay Area. I've had clients who've then gone have sold their homes and no longer use Section 8 at all, right? They earned so much equity appreciation in the 10 to 15 years they lived in their home. They were able to sell their home and no longer get any government benefits at all. So it's kind of a path out of poverty, if you want to look at it that way. It's a
um,
challenging program. You must be a Section 8 renter first. And that may be the hardest part in some parts of the country. Not all of the housing. So HUD, in its wisdom, has housing authorities all over the country, and they're not necessarily city-based or even they're usually city-based or county-based. Sometimes a combination. Like in one of the counties I serve, there's like 6 housing authorities because the larger cities tend to have their own. So um, But not all housing authorities even offer this option. It's completely at the discretion of the local housing authority as to whether they're going to offer the home ownership Section 8 program. Still takes a long time because the borrower needs to qualify, have some financial literacy. They need to have good credit, some dollars. They have to take classes, and they still need to find the property, and that can take a long time uh, because the subsidies, the amount that the housing authorities will pay, allow a, say, for example, a two-bedroom voucher holder to pay for rent and may not be enough money for it to be a decent enough size mortgage payment that they would be able to afford anything. And in highly, in very unaffordable areas, that can become a real problem in terms of being able to use this program. But it's out
Yes.
there and it's worth researching.
Steven, we had a
Yes.
question on your last slide. What about VA disability? I don't believe there are any bank account limits with them.
Yes, the VA, thank you for asking that question because I was going to add a whole slide about VA loans in here and I forgot to do it. So thank you for asking. So VA loans. Uh, the general idea with VA loans is it isn't really a down payment assistance thing. It's just a different kind of loan. So people who can qualify for VA loans are either a um, uh, a veteran or the surviving spouse of a veteran. And they would obviously, that program, one of the best things about it is it's zero down payment, which makes it just, awesome. And they also have lower interest rates typically because it's guaranteed loan by the federal VA, by the VA, it's guaranteed. Therefore, banks will do them at a lower percentage than they would for a conventional conforming loan. Um, and the good news is that there was a restriction. There was a restriction with VA loans associated with the buyer having to pay third party fees like realtor fees, which has been suspended and probably, I hope, will stay that way. So, as our industry changes, VA loans are not going to be a problem, at least in the short term, with VA loans being VA loan buyers being able to get to pay their realtors if they have to. All right. Um, we want to talk a little bit about fair housing law. So the first thing is there's federal fair housing law and then there's state law. Many states have overlay over the federal housing law with their own state housing, fair housing law. And they may even have a department of fair housing at your state. And what's really important here to know is that the vast majority of fair housing complaints nationwide have to do with disability, not with any other fair housing violation. It's the number one thing. And so it's really important that us agents know our clients' rights and to look out for obvious and not so obvious violations of fair housing law. So how is this relevant to our clients? Well, let's suppose you're representing a buyer who wants to buy a condo, and the condo they want to buy is they've looked at it. It's zero. Let's suppose your client is a person who uses a wheelchair, and the condo meets all their accessibility needs, except that the parking spot assigned for that condo unit is too far a distance away from their unit. Your job is to alert your client that that represents a potential fair housing violation and that they have the opportunity to ask the HOA to make an accommodation to make parking closer by. And that HOAs, as a rule, have a responsibility to accommodate fair housing requests, which would include that. So it's not good to simply say, oh, we will pass on that one, right? Because the parking space isn't close enough. The better thing to do is to advise your client about their opportunity to question the HOA. You don't have to be threatening, but basically say, hey, what can we do because my client really likes this property to make it work for them. So we have an obligation to be advocates and fiduciaries for our clients. And I just gave you one example. There's lots of incidences where we shouldn't just settle when our clients' fair housing rights are being threatened. I'm not sure how many people on this call are familiar with Fair Haven. Fair Haven was created by the National Association of Realtors, and I put a QR code on this screen and the link so that you guys can run this simulator. It's kind of fun. You get to be, you get to basically play, play as the realtor in this little town of Fairhaven, dealing with buyer and seller situations. And you get to make a choice. So you're going to do this, so you're going to do that, you're going to do this. And then it tells you how you did on a fair housing scale in your responses and how you managed the questions. Now, this is just a great way to get a sense of how we stack up in terms of our own understanding of fair housing law and our ability to act as true advocates for our clients. So I do encourage people to check this out if you haven't yet. So, best practices. Best practices. First of all, focus on the person, not on their disability. Focus on the client, not on their care provider. I was shocked a few years ago when I my wife was at that time we were using she was using a manual wheelchair and I was pushing her in the manual wheelchair. She had significant fatigue issues, and we were at a medical establishment, a medical office building, and the person who came to help us was talking to me and not to her. Um, don't do that. Talk to the client. um, I was really surprised about that happening in a medical place where you would expect it not to happen, right? Avoid judgment and assumptions. Don't rely on the MLS or the other agent to understand your client's needs, and ask lots of questions. I also wanted to give you guys a link to my Housing Matters, Accessible Housing Matters podcast. I have interviewed thought leaders around the country around issues around accessibility and housing, not just purchase and sale, but all aspects of accessibility and housing. And so if you're interested in that, there's a link to that here, and you can um, listen to some of those interviews. I also wanted to give you a couple of other resources. This is mostly my stuff, but at the bottom, there's a link to a very good website called achievingindependence.com. And it has all kinds of resources about trusts and conservatorships. Now, it's a California based thing, but if there is a special needs trust expertise in your community, that can be a really helpful thing. Special needs trusts are a legal vehicle for sheltering assets and sheltering money for the benefit of a person with a disability. And that might be a source of down payment funds in and of itself in those cases where such trusts exist. Here's my full contact information. And I absolutely want to open it up for questions at this point. Any other questions, or just have a dialogue? Um, and before we run out of the time on the clock, we have about 5 minutes left. Is there any questions that I can answer? Any other questions?
Someone in the chat said, can we go back to the last slide just for a second?
Sure. Which one was that though? Sorry, I went too fast. I'm sorry. Let me see. How do I do that? I'm happy to do it. I just have to figure out how to get my computer to go back. Why is it not want to do that? Hmm. I'm gonna have to break out of it and go back into it.
Okay, and I think they said it's the second,
Yeah,
the
I just need to figure out how to. I just need to figure out how to do it. Just give me a sec. There we go. All right. Was it this one or this one?
The one with the QR code.
The one with the QR code for me or for the podcast?
They said, sorry, one more back.
Sorry. This one.
Oh, the things to avoid.
Oh, the things to avoid. You mean the best practices? This one? Or maybe this one. Fairhaven, the simulator. It had a QR code too.
Best practices, please.
Best practices. Sorry. Okay. Finally, we're there. Did anybody else have any questions?
Um, are you able to share the slideshow with me so that I can send it
Of
out to?
course.
Perfect.
Of course. Of course. Of course.
Great. So
Well,
we will be sending the slides out.
I hope that everyone found this helpful. My contact information is here. What happened? My contact information is not coming up on the screen. That's weird. I wanted to just put it back up on the screen so that you could. There we go. My contact information is on the screen. If anyone wants to follow up with me with any questions about this presentation, anything more I can do to answer your specific questions, I'm happy to do it. So please feel free to reach out.
We do have one more question. What would be a fair housing acceptable term for multi-generational space?
I don't know about a term, but I might say something like, I don't know that there's anything wrong with saying multi-generational space. I really don't. But if you're concerned about that, you could say multi-purpose, I suppose. They don't like multi-generational, huh? Interesting. So I think that's interesting. They don't want you to say multi-generational space. I wonder what their fair housing concern is there, because it's not like you're saying good for seniors or good for children or families or anything. You're saying multi-generational. I wonder what the concern is. I would ask your MLS what the concern is there. I'm not sure. Um, but I guess you'd have to say versatile, right? Maybe intergenerational living. I don't know. That's a really, yeah, I guess it's family, the word family. But I do like the idea of versatile or multi-purpose or uh, a wide variety of usages for uh, different needs. I don't know. None of that is catchy at all. So if there aren't any more questions, I think we're done, huh?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Have a good day, everybody. Thank you so much.